I always knew my Aunt Diana was jealous of my mother's inheritance, but I never thought she'd stoop this low. My name is Sarah Collins, 34, single mother to twins Amy and Adam, age 8. When my mother passed away last year, leaving me her beautiful Victorian house and a substantial trust fund for the kids, Diana's mask of familial affection finally cracked. It started with small things, anonymous calls to the school about the twins looking undernourished, complaints to the HOA about my yard maintenance, and whispers at family gatherings about how I was struggling as a single mother. But last Thursday, everything escalated when 5 different neighbors showed up at my door with a CPS worker. I didn't recognize any of them, which was strange because I knew everyone on our street. The first red flag. Miss Collins, the CPS worker, Mrs. Martinez, said gravely. These individuals have filed separate reports about witnessing concerning behavior toward your children. A well-dressed woman stepped forward, dabbing at fake tears. I saw her dragging those poor children by their arms last Tuesday. They were screaming. I almost laughed. Last Tuesday, the twins and I were in Disney World, our annual vacation week. I had the photos, hotel receipts, and Mickey Mouse ears to prove it. I heard the little girl crying almost every night, added a man in a business suit. The screams keep me awake. Second red flag. The houses on either side of mine have been empty for months, undergoing renovation. There were no immediate neighbors to hear anything. But the most telling detail, all 5 witnesses kept glancing nervously at their phones, as if checking a script. That's when I remembered the Ring camera footage I hadn't reviewed yet. Mrs. Martinez, I said calmly, would you like to see something interesting? I pulled out my tablet and accessed my security system. The previous night's footage showed my Aunt Diana's Mercedes pulling into the far corner of the cul-de-sac at 11 p.m. One by one, these same 5 concerned citizens had approached her car, each leaving with what looked suspiciously like an envelope. Just a moment, I said, turning up the volume. Diana's voice came through crystal clear. Remember, stick to the script. Sarah's violent with the kids every Tuesday and Thursday. You've heard screaming. Make it convincing. There's another 1,000 if CPS removes the kids. Mrs. Martinez's expression shifted from concern to anger as she watched. One of the witnesses, the crying woman, started backing toward the door. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding, I replied, switching to footage from just an hour before they arrived. There was Diana again, huddled with the group in the nearby park, handing out papers, their scripts, presumably. The house should have been mine, Diana had said clearly in the video. My sister had no right to leave everything to Sarah. Once CPS takes the kids, we can challenge the will. She'll be proved an unfit mother. Mrs. Martinez had seen enough. This is a criminal offense, she stated, turning to the now pale-faced group of actors. Filing false reports to CBS, conspiracy to commit fraud. The witnesses scattered like cockroaches in light, practically tripping over each other to get out my door. But I wasn't done yet. My security system had caught something else. Something that would wipe the smug smile off Diana's face permanently. Mrs. Martinez, there's more, I said, switching to footage from my backyard camera. This is from 2 nights ago. The video showed Diana and her husband sneaking around my property at 2 a.m., planting evidence. Empty wine bottles, scattered pills, and what looked like drug paraphernalia. They'd even staged some broken toys and torn children's clothes. We did a property sweep before entering, Mrs. Martinez said, her jaw tight. Found all of that. I assume you have the footage of them purchasing these items. I nodded, pulling up the final video. Diana at the dollar store, filling her cart with toys to break and clothes to tear. She paid in cash, but her face was clearly visible. Just then, my phone buzzed. Speaking of the devil, it was Diana. Sarah, darling, her voice dripped honey and poison. I just heard CPS is at your house. I'm so worried about the children. In fact, I'm on my way over right now. As their only living relative, I believe I should be present for this discussion. I caught Mrs. Martinez's eye and put the phone on speaker. Of course, Aunt Diana. Please come over. There's something on my security cameras you really need to see. Security cameras? For the first time, Diana's voice faltered. Oh yes, I replied calmly. The ones that caught you paying actors in the parking lot last night. The ones that recorded you planting evidence in my yard. The ones that caught every word of your little script meeting in the park. Those security cameras. The line went dead. Mrs. Martinez was already on her phone, reporting the false claims and suspected fraud. But I knew Diana wouldn't give up easily. This was just the beginning. But thanks to my Ring camera's unblinking eye, I was ready for whatever came next. The next 24 hours proved I was right about Diana not giving up easily. After her phone call abruptly ended, she launched what I can only describe as a desperate scorched earth campaign. First came the mass email to our entire extended family, painting herself as the concerned aunt trying to save her poor, troubled niece's children. The email detailed my supposed violent episodes, complete with doctor photos showing bruises on the twins, badly edited pictures from their martial arts class last summer. What Diana didn't know was that I'd already sent the security footage to key family members. Cousin Mark, a police detective, was particularly interested in the video showing her staging evidence. Aunt Susan, who sat on the board of Diana's beloved country club, watched the footage of her paying actors with great interest. But Diana's biggest mistake came that evening. I was helping the twins with their homework when aggressive knocking rattled my front door. Diana stood there with her husband Tom and, surprisingly, 2 police officers. "These officers need to speak with Amy and Adam," Diana announced triumphantly. "Alone." Officer Chen, however, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we received a call about children in distress." I smiled, reaching for my phone. "Officers, I assume you'd like to see my security footage first?" The same footage I shared with Detective Mark Collins this morning. Diana's face went from smug to pale in seconds. "What footage?" "Tom, they're lying." "Actually," Officer Chen interrupted, "Detective Collins already briefed us. We're here about a different matter." He turned to Diana and Tom. "Would you like to explain why you were attempting to break into this property at 3 a.m. last night?" Now it was my turn to be surprised. I quickly checked my phone's security alerts. There they were, notifications I'd missed during the twins' soccer practice. Crystal clear footage of Diana and Tom trying to force open my back door in the middle of the night, only running away when my security lights activated. We were checking on the children. Diana sputtered. "Are you trying to pick a lock?" Officer Chen asked dryly. "Mrs. Wallace, we have you on camera attempting to break and enter, following your documented attempts to file false CPS reports. Would you like to explain that?" Tom, always the weaker link, broke first. "Diana said we needed to get inside to to find evidence. She said if we could just prove Sarah was unfit." "Tom, shut up." Diana hissed, but it was too late. "Mr. Wallace," the second officer said, "are you admitting to conspiracy to commit breaking and entering, filing false reports, and attempting to fraudulently interfere with a custody situation?" The twins, watching from the stairs despite my attempts to keep them in the study room, chose that moment to speak up. "Is that why you told those people to lie about Mommy?" Amy asked Diana innocently. "Because you wanted our house?" Adam nodded. "We saw you giving them money. It's all on our tablets. Mom set up the security app for us after you started being mean." Diana's perfectly made-up face crumpled. "You little brats. This is all your mother's fault. That house should have been mine. I was the eldest daughter. I deserved." "Mrs. Wallace," Officer Chen cut in, "please put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for attempted breaking and entering, filing false reports, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As they led Diana and Tom to the police car, she started screaming about lawyers and family betrayal. The neighbors, the real ones, peeked out from behind their curtains at the spectacle. "Mom?" Adam tugged at my sleeve. "Is Aunt Diana going to jail?" I knelt down to hug both my children. "She made some very bad choices, honey, but we're safe, and that's what matters." Later that night, after the twins were asleep, I reviewed the security footage again. Diana's face as she tried to break in showed something beyond greed. There was desperation there. I discovered why the next morning when her husband's law firm called me. Apparently, Diana had been embezzling from their family business for years, using the money to maintain her lavish lifestyle. She'd been counting on getting my mother's house to cover her tracks before the annual audit. Now, with her arrest making headlines, the firm was launching a full investigation. The Ring camera footage had done more than protect us from false accusations. It had exposed years of deception. Sometimes karma needs a little technological assistance. As I watched the twins playing safely in our backyard the next day, I couldn't help but feel grateful for modern security systems. Diana had underestimated not just my preparedness, but also my determination to protect my children. The house she coveted so desperately would remain what my mother had intended, a safe haven for her grandchildren, protected now not just by locks and walls, but by an invisible network of digital eyes, always watching, always recording, keeping us safe from those who would harm us, even if they share our blood. 6 months after Diana's arrest, I sat in the courtroom watching her sentencing. She traded her designer clothes for a plain navy suit, her carefully maintained appearance showing signs of strain. The evidence against her had been overwhelming, not just my security footage, but years of financial records revealing her elaborate schemes. "Mrs. Wallace," the judge began, "this court finds your actions particularly disturbing. Not only did you attempt to fraudulently separate children from their mother, but you also embezzled nearly $2 million from your family's company." Diana's shoulders slumped as the judge continued listing her crimes. Tom had taken a plea deal, testifying against her in exchange for a lighter sentence. The hired actors had also cooperated, providing detailed statements about her orchestration of the false CPS reports. 7 years, the judge announced finally, with restitution to be paid to both the company and to Miss Collins for emotional damages. As they led Diana away, she turned to me. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "You've destroyed this family." I simply held up my phone, recording one last time. Even now, she couldn't help but show her true colors. Outside the courthouse, my father, Diana's brother, waited with the twins. He'd been devastated by his sister's actions, but had stood firmly by us throughout the ordeal. "Is it over, Mom?" Amy asked, hugging me tightly. "Yes, sweetheart, it's really over." The aftermath of Diana's arrest had rippled through our family in unexpected ways. The relatives who'd initially believed her emails now regularly checked in with us, perhaps compensating for their momentary doubt. The neighborhood, far from being scandalized, had rallied around us. Mrs. Peterson next door had organized a support group for families affected by toxic relatives, and our weekly meetings had become a source of healing for many. The twins, remarkably resilient, had turned the experience into a positive lesson. Their school presentation on modern technology and safety, featuring our Ring camera story, had won first prize at the science fair. They'd become little advocates for home security, solemnly advising their friends about the importance of catching bad guys on camera. 1 month after the sentencing, I received an unexpected visit from Tom's daughter from his first marriage, Lauren. She'd been estranged from her father and Diana for years, and the recent events had confirmed her long-held suspicions. "They did the same thing to me," she revealed over coffee in my kitchen. "Diana convinced my dad I was unstable when I was 17. I lost everything, my college fund, my home, my relationship with my father. I wish I'd had security cameras back then." Together, we pieced together Diana's pattern. She'd been manipulating family situations for decades, always with the same goal of financial gain. The house she wanted from me was just the latest target in a long line of attempted thefts. Lauren and I decided to create a support network for other victims of family financial abuse. We called it Eyes Wide Open, offering advice about protecting assets and documenting suspicious behavior. The Ring camera footage from my case became a powerful teaching tool, showing others how to protect themselves. The twins took particular pride in their role as junior security consultants, solemnly explaining to visitors how our camera system worked. Their trauma counselor said this sense of empowerment was helping them process the experience in a healthy way. 1 year to the day after Diana first sent her fake witnesses to my door, we held a family reunion, the first since her arrest. It was smaller than previous years, but somehow warmer, more genuine. Those who attended were the ones who'd stood by us, who'd chosen truth over manipulation. As I watched the twins playing with their cousins in the backyard, Lauren joined me on the porch. "You know what's ironic?" she said, sipping her lemonade. "Diana always wanted this house because she thought it would give her power over the family. But in the end, the house helped expose her instead." She was right. My mother's house, with its network of security cameras, had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of protection, of truth prevailing over deception. That evening, after the guests had left and the twins were in bed, I sat in my garden reviewing the security footage out of habit. But instead of looking for threats, I found myself watching clips of the day's celebration. Children laughing, family members hugging, genuine moments of joy captured by the same cameras that had once caught Diana's crimes. The cameras still watched, but now they recorded a different story. One of healing, of family bonds strengthened through adversity, of truth and justice prevailing. Diana had wanted to use my children to steal this house. But in the end, she'd given us an unexpected gift. The knowledge that sometimes the best defense against darkness is simply shining a light on it. And somewhere in a prison cell, Diana was learning the hardest lesson of all, that in an age of digital eyes, the truth will always find its way into the light. I sold those old beds your kids never use. Harold's smut voice crackled through my phone speaker. My grandkids needed new ones, and those were just collecting dust in your storage. I gripped the edge of my desk at the museum where I worked as a historical artifact specialist, trying to keep my voice steady. The Victorian rosewood beds with the hand-carved headboards. I asked, already knowing the answer. My children had outgrown them, but we had carefully preserved them in climate-controlled storage for a reason. Yeah, those ancient things, Harold chuckled. Got $2,000 for them. Pretty good deal for some old furniture, right? My daughter's kids deserve nice new beds anyway, not hand-me-downs. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. That's interesting, Harold. And you did this without asking because... Oh, come on, Madison. They were just sitting there, and family helps family. My grandkids needed beds. Besides, you're always going on about history and preservation. It's just furniture. Just furniture, if he only knew. I glanced at the documentation on my desk. Papers I'd been preparing for the upcoming museum exhibition on 19th century craftsman Thomas Winchester. The same Winchester whose signature was carefully carved into those beds frames, making them worth roughly $150,000 each to collectors. Well, thank you for letting me know, I said calmly, already pulling up my email to contact the insurance company. Would you happen to have the buyer's information? What for? Harold's voice took on an edge of suspicion. Deal's done. Money spent. My grandkids are happy with their new beds. Just for my records, I replied, since they were in my storage unit. Look, I did you a favor clearing out that junk. You should be thanking me. His tone dripped with the same condescension I'd endured since he married my mother-in-law Jane 2 years ago. Besides, your kids are too old for those tiny beds anyway. I thought about explaining that the tiny beds were actually rare examples of Winchester's early work, commissioned for a governor's children in 1862, that they were featured in multiple historical furniture catalogs, that museums have been trying to acquire them for years, but I kept them safe because they were a legacy from my grandmother, who'd recognized their value when she found them at an estate sale decades ago. But Harold wouldn't understand. To him, anything that didn't immediately benefit his daughter Amanda and her children was worthless. He'd made that clear from the moment he joined our family, constantly comparing our children, making snide remarks about my obsession with historical preservation while praising Amanda's modern sensibilities. You're right, I said instead. The kids have outgrown them. I hope Amanda's children enjoy their new beds. I ended the call before he could respond, then immediately dialed my insurance agent. Sarah, it's Madison Wells. Remember those Winchester beds we have on the special articles policy? I need to report a theft. The authenticated pair from 1862? Sarah's voice rose in alarm. What happened? I explained the situation, my anger finally seeping into my voice. My stepfather-in-law sold them without permission. Claims he got $2,000 for the pair. To thou, Madison, those beds are worth at least $300,000 combined. They're historically significant pieces. I know, I said, pulling up the most recent authentication documents on my computer. That's why I'm calling. I need to file a claim and report this to the police. Harold had no right to sell them, and whoever bought them likely has no idea what they actually purchased. As I spoke with Sarah, my phone buzzed with a text from my husband Peter. Dad just called, sounding weird. Something about beds? What's going on? I typed back quickly. Your stepfather sold the Winchester beds from storage. You know, the ones my grandmother left me. The museum pieces worth $150,000 each. 3 dots appeared immediately then. He dead wet? Calling insurance now. We'll need to file a police report. Those beds were documented historical artifacts. Peter's response was immediate. I'll call Mom. This is absolutely insane. He had no right. I turned back to my conversation with Sarah, who was already mobilizing the insurance company's art and antiquities team. We'll need to file a police report, she was saying, and contact any local antique dealers who might have purchased them. Thank goodness you had them properly documented and insured. Harold has no idea what he actually sold, I said, a grim satisfaction settling over me. He thinks he did everyone a favor getting rid of some old furniture. Well, he's about to learn a very expensive lesson about selling things that don't belong to him, Sarah replied. The insurance company will want their money back if we can't recover the beds, and since he sold them without authorization, he'll be legally responsible for the full value, I finished, all $300,000 of it. As I hung up with Sarah, another text came through, this time from my mother-in-law Jane. Harold said you're making a big fuss over some old beds. Why can't you just be happy the kids have nice new ones? I stared at the message, thinking about how to respond. Jane, like Harold, had never understood or respected my work in historical preservation. To them, the past was disposable. Only the newest and shiniest things had value. Those old beds were authenticated Winchester pieces from 1862, I wrote back. Worth $150,000 each. Harold sold stolen property, and I've had to report it to the police and insurance company. Maybe ask him why he thought it was okay to sell something that didn't belong to him. The three dots appeared and disappeared several times before her response came through. That's impossible. They were just children's beds. Check your email, I replied, attaching photos of the authentication documents and insurance policies. I'll let you explain to Harold that he just created a $300,000 problem for himself. Setting my phone down, I turned to my computer to draft a formal police report. Harold had always treated me with condescension, dismissed my career, and acted like his daughter's family was more important than ours. Now his arrogance was about to cost him dearly, and I couldn't find it in myself to feel sorry for him at all. My phone buzzed again. A call from the museum's curator. Time to explain why two valuable pieces of American furniture history were now missing, sold for a fraction of their worth by a stepfather-in-law who thought he knew better than everyone else. At least this would be an interesting story for the insurance claim. The aftermath unfolded faster than I expected. Within hours of filing the police report, Detective Morris was interviewing me in my office at the museum. Let me get this straight, he said, reviewing my documentation. Your stepfather-in-law sold two authenticated Thomas Winchester beds, circa 1862, for $2,000, without permission. Correct, I replied, handing him the most recent appraisal. He thought they were just old children's beds in storage. He sold them to buy his grandchildren new furniture. The detective whistled low, and their actual value is $150,000 each minimum. They're featured in several historical furniture catalogs. Museums have been trying to acquire them for years. Just then, my phone erupted with texts. Harold's name flashed across the screen repeatedly, followed by Jane's and Amanda's. I showed the detective my phone. Looks like I've seen the police report. Mrs. Wells, Detective Morris said, I've already contacted local antique dealers with the beds' descriptions. Given their historical significance, we should be able to track them down. Would you like me to speak with your stepfather-in-law? Before I could answer, my office door burst open. Harold stormed in, face red with anger, Jane and Amanda trailing behind him. This is ridiculous, he shouted, waving his phone. The police just called me about those worthless beds. What kind of game are you playing? Detective Morris stood, badge already in hand. Mr. Thompson, I'm Detective Morris. We were just discussing the theft and sale of historically significant artifacts valued at approximately $300,000. Harold's face went from red to white. 300. That's impossible. They were just old beds. Winchester beds, I corrected quietly, from 1862. Authenticated, documented, and insured. Which you would have known if you'd asked before selling them. You never told us they were valuable. Amanda interjected, her voice shrill. How were we supposed to know? That's the point, I replied, keeping my voice level. You weren't supposed to sell them at all. They weren't yours to sell. Jane stepped forward, her expression pleading. Madison, surely we can work this out as a family. Harold was just trying to help his grandchildren. By stealing and selling my property? I asked. Property that was properly documented and insured? That's not helping. That's theft. Detective Morris cleared his throat. Mr. Thompson, I'll need the buyer's information. The sooner we locate these pieces, the better for everyone involved. Harold sank into a chair, his bravado deflating. I sold them to a dealer. Some shop downtown. Second Chances Antiques, I think. The one on Mason Street? Detective Morris asked, already noting it down. Yes, Harold mumbled. I didn't get his card. He paid cash. I exchanged glances with the detective. Cash sales of antiques often meant the dealer knew they were getting something too good to be true. And you didn't think that was suspicious? I asked. A cash payment for 2 antique beds. I thought I was getting a good deal. Harold snapped, but his voice lacked conviction. Mr. Thompson, Detective Morris interjected, you do understand the seriousness of this situation. These aren't just ordinary pieces of furniture. They're documented historical artifacts. Their sale without authorization would result in significant legal consequences. But he's family. Jane protested. Madison, you can't really be pressing charges. I'm not, I said calmly. The insurance company is. Those beds were insured for their full value. If they can't be recovered, they'll want their money back. And since Harold sold them without authorization, he'll have to pay the full value, Detective Morris finished, plus any additional damages. Amanda started crying. Dad was just trying to help my kids. We needed new furniture. And instead of asking or buying it himself, he stole and sold valuable antiques, I replied. Actions have consequences. Harold stood up suddenly. I'll go to the shop. I'll get them back. I'll fix this. Sir, I wouldn't advise that, Detective Morris said firmly. Let us handle the recovery. You've done enough damage. As if on cue, my office phone rang. It was Sarah from the insurance company. Madison, we've got a problem. Those beds, they've already been sold to a private collector. The shop owner claims he has no record of the sale. I put the phone on speaker, watching Harold's face crumple as Sarah continued. We're looking at a full claim situation here. The company will pay out the insured value, but they'll be pursuing full restitution from the responsible party. Harold sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally hitting him. $300,000, he whispered, but I only got $2,000 for them. Plus legal fees, Detective Morris added, and possible criminal charges for selling stolen property. Jane grabbed Harold's arm. We'll figure something out. We can take out a loan. Your house isn't worth that much, I said quietly, and no bank will give you a loan for stolen property. Amanda turned on me, tears streaking her makeup. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Watching our family fall apart. No, I replied, standing up. I'm watching someone face the consequences of their actions. Harold sold something precious, something irreplaceable, without a second thought because he didn't respect its value, or me. The room fell silent except for Amanda's muffled sobs. Detective Morris gathered his notes. I'll be in touch once we track down the collector, he said. In the meantime, Mr. Thompson, don't leave town. We'll have more questions. As they filed out of my office, Harold looked back at me, his arrogance replaced by fear. Madison, please, there must be something. There is, I said. You can start by explaining to your grandchildren why taking things that don't belong to you is wrong. Seems like a lesson this family needs to learn. The door closed behind them, leaving me alone with the weight of what had just happened. My phone buzzed. A text from Peter. Just heard from Mom. Is it true about the beds? Yes, I replied. Your stepfather's about to learn a very expensive lesson about respect. 3 weeks later, I sat across from Harold and Jane in their living room, watching them sign the repayment agreement my lawyer had drafted. The private collector had refused to return the beds, claiming he purchased them legally. The insurance company had paid out the claim and was now pursuing full restitution from Harold. Initial here, my lawyer pointed, and here, this acknowledges your responsibility for the full amount of $300,000 plus legal fees. Harold's hand shook as he signed. He'd aged years in the past few weeks, his arrogance replaced by a haunted look. Jane kept dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. We'll have to sell the house, she whispered. Everything we've saved. You should have thought about that before Harold sold something that didn't belong to him, I replied calmly. Amanda had stopped speaking to me entirely, blaming me for her parents' financial ruin. She'd moved her children's new beds out of spite, claiming they didn't want stolen money furniture. The irony wasn't lost on me. The payment schedule is clear, my lawyer continued. Monthly installments for the next 15 years. Any default will result in immediate legal action. 15 years, Harold muttered. I'll be paying for this until I'm 80. Consider it a long-term lesson in respecting other people's property, I said, standing up. And their professions. Those worthless old beds turned out to be quite valuable after all. As we left their house, Peter squeezed my hand. He'd stood by me through everything, understanding that this wasn't just about the beds. It was about years of disrespect and entitlement. Think they've learned anything? He asked. They've learned actions have consequences, I replied. That's a start. The museum had arranged to display photos of the Winchester beds in their upcoming exhibition, with a note about their unfortunate loss to a private collection. Every time Harold saw the article in the local paper about the exhibition, he'd be reminded of his $300,000 mistake. Jane called the next day, her voice small. Madison, I'm sorry, we should have asked. Should have respected your work, your knowledge. I never thought. That's the problem, I interrupted gently. You never thought. You and Harold just assumed you knew better than everyone else. How's that working out? She was quiet for a moment. We were wrong. So wrong. And now we're losing everything. No, I corrected. You're facing consequences. There's a difference. Maybe next time you'll think before letting Harold make decisions about other people's property. The story spread through the antique collection community. The museum curator even used it as a cautionary tale in his lectures about historical preservation. Always respect provenance, he'd say, or it might cost you your house. 6 months later, I received an unexpected package. Inside was a handwritten apology from Harold, along with detailed photos of the Winchester beds in their new home. The private collector had reached out to him, sending pictures after learning the full story. They're displayed beautifully, Harold wrote. Not that it makes up for what I did. I never understood the value of history, of preservation. I'm learning now, even if the lesson came at a terrible price. I showed the letter to Peter over dinner. Think he means it. Does it matter? Peter asked. He's got 15 years of payments to remind him either way. I smiled, thinking of the empty storage unit where the beds had once stood. Sometimes the most valuable lessons come at the highest cost. Harold had learned that the hard way. The next family gathering was quieter, more subdued. Amanda still wouldn't look at me, but Harold and Jane had lost their superior attitude. Every month when they wrote that restitution check, they were reminded that respect isn't just about money. It's about recognizing value in things you might not understand. As for me, I continued my work at the museum, preserving history one piece at a time. And if I occasionally smiled when signing the receipt for Harold's monthly payment, well, that was just another piece of history in the making. Mom, all our stuff is gone. Emma's trembling voice echoed through the phone, making my heart sink. We had just landed back from our 2-week Caribbean vacation, and my 8-year-old twins were supposed to be settling back into their rooms. Instead, I was hearing my daughter's sobs while my son Jake could be heard sniffling in the background. What do you mean gone? I asked, gripping my phone tighter as I rushed through the airport terminal, leaving my husband, Michael, to deal with the luggage. Grandma and Grandpa gave our rooms to Mr. Peterson's kids. All our things are in boxes in the attic. Emma's voice cracked. They said we should be grateful we have a corner up there. I felt my blood run cold. The Petersons, my in-laws' closest friends, had 3 teenage children who apparently needed a place to stay while their house underwent renovations. And my in-laws, who had been entrusted with watching our house, had decided to offer up my children's rooms without so much as a text message to us. Stay calm, sweetie. Daddy and I will be home in 20 minutes. The drive home was tense. Michael kept insisting there must be some misunderstanding, that his parents would never do something like this. But I knew better. Barbara and George Mitchell had always favored their friends' children over their own grandchildren. To them, the Petersons' kids were accomplished. The eldest was a tennis champion, the middle child a math prodigy, and the youngest some kind of musical genius. Meanwhile, my twins were just normal kids who enjoyed reading comics and playing in the backyard. As we pulled into our driveway, I saw Barbara standing on the porch, arms crossed, wearing that smug expression I'd grown to detest over the years. George was beside her, looking uncomfortable but resolute. Finally, Barbara called out as we approached. "We've been trying to reach you. The Petersons needed a place to stay, and since you were away, you gave away my children's rooms." I kept my voice steady, though inside I was shaking with rage. "Without asking us." "Now, Amanda," George started, using that condescending tone he reserved for when he thought I was being unreasonable. "The Petersons are going through a difficult time. Their renovation is taking longer than expected, and those children need proper spaces to maintain their rigorous study schedules." "And what about my children?" I asked, watching as Emma and Jake peeked out from behind the front door, their eyes red from crying. Barbara waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, they're young. They can adapt. Besides, the attic is perfectly fine. We even put a fan up there for them." She smiled as if she deserved praise for this minimal consideration. "You moved all their things without permission," I stated, my voice growing colder. "Their books, their toys, their clothes. Those rooms were being wasted on comic books and stuffed animals." Barbara sniffed. "Madison needs space for her tennis trophies, and Alexander requires proper lighting for his advanced mathematics studies. And little Victoria's piano barely fit through the door. But we managed." She beamed with pride, as if destroying my children's sanctuary was some kind of achievement. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something to defend our children. But he stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, caught between his role as father and dutiful son. Some things never changed. "Well," I said, my tone eerily calm. "Thank you for letting us know." Barbara's smug smile faltered slightly. She had expected arguing, tears, maybe even a confrontation. My composure seemed to unsettle her. "You're welcome," she said, uncertainty creeping into her voice. What my in-laws didn't know was that I had been preparing for something like this for months. Their pattern of dismissing my children's needs in favor of others had been escalating, and I had taken precautions. As I walked past them into the house, I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to Diana, my lawyer. "It's time. Plan B." The response came almost immediately. "Documents ready. Meeting tomorrow at 9. "Perfect." I replied, then turned to my shell-shocked family. "Emma, Jake, go get your pajamas from the attic. You'll be sleeping in the guest room tonight." I pulled them close, whispering, "Don't worry. This is temporary. Mom's got this." As I helped my children gather their necessities, I could hear Barbara in the hallway showing off Madison's new training space and Alexander's study sanctuary to Michael. The Petersons' kids had already made themselves at home, their belongings spread across my children's rooms as if they owned them. That night, as the twins finally fell asleep in the guest room, exhausted from crying, I sat in the kitchen with my laptop open, reviewing the documents Diana had prepared months ago. My in-laws had no idea that their latest power play would trigger a series of events that would change everything. They thought they had the upper hand, that their position as homeowners gave them the right to make decisions about our living space. What they didn't know was that I had been documenting every incident, every dismissal of my children's needs, every time they had overstepped their boundaries. And more importantly, they had no idea about the inheritance I had received from my grandmother 3 months ago, enough to ensure my children would never have to depend on their grandparents' conditional generosity again. As I closed my laptop, I heard Barbara's voice drifting up from the first floor, gushing about how the Petersons' children were such a blessing and how they deserved the best. I smiled to myself, knowing that in less than 24 hours, their perfect plan would begin to unravel. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate confrontation. It's letting people think they've won, right before you pull the rug out from under them. The next morning, I walked into Diana's office feeling more determined than ever. She greeted me with a knowing smile, spreading out the paperwork we prepared months ago. "Your in-laws really outdid themselves this time," she said, reviewing my account of yesterday's events. "Moving your children's belongings without permission, giving away their rooms. It's perfect timing, actually." I nodded, pulling out my phone to show her the photos I'd taken last night. My children's possessions carelessly piled in boxes, the rooms completely transformed for the Petersons' kids, the makeshift sleeping area in the attic. "The house inspection is scheduled for tomorrow," Diana continued, "and the offer on the Victorian property on Maple Street is still good. Are you sure you're ready for this?" "More than ready. I replied, signing the documents in front of me. My children deserve better than being treated like second-class citizens in their own home. What Barbara and George didn't know was that 3 months ago, when my grandmother passed away, she'd left me more than enough money to buy our own place. I'd been waiting for the right moment to make our move, and they just handed it to me on a silver platter. Back at the house, Barbara was hosting a lunch for the Petersons, showing off how wonderfully she'd redecorated my children's rooms. I could hear Madison practicing her tennis swings against the wall, the same wall where Emma's beloved bookshelf used to be. "Amanda," Barbara called out when she saw me. "Come see how organized everything is now. The Petersons are so grateful for the space." I smiled politely, declining the invitation. "Actually, I need to talk to Michael about something important." I found my husband in his study, looking stressed and conflicted. "Michael," I said softly, "we need to make a decision. Your parents have gone too far this time." He ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since college. I know. But they're just trying to help the Petersons. Maybe if we give it a few weeks." "Our children are sleeping in the attic, Michael. Their belongings are in boxes. How many more weeks should they endure that?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. Right on schedule, Tom Peterson, the children's father, arrived to check on his kids. I heard Barbara's delighted greeting, followed by a tour of the newly arranged spaces. "And look how perfect Madison's trophies look on these built-in shelves." Barbara's voice carried up the stairs. "Amanda's children barely use this room anyway, just collecting dust with all those books and toys." That's when Michael's expression changed. Perhaps it was hearing his mother dismiss his children's existence so casually, or maybe it was seeing the tears welling up in my eyes. Whatever it was, something finally clicked. "What do you need me to do?" he asked quietly. I handed him the papers Diana had prepared. "Sign these. It's time we stood up for our family." The next morning, while Barbara was helping the Peterson children prepare for their various lessons, the housing inspector arrived. I watched from the kitchen as she methodically went through each room, taking notes and photographs. "Mrs. Mitchell," she called out to Barbara, who had rushed to investigate the unexpected visitor, "I'm here to complete the inspection for the rental agreement." Barbara's face went pale. "Rental agreement? What rental agreement?" "The one filed yesterday," the inspector replied, checking her paperwork. "According to this, you're renting out rooms to the Peterson family." "That's ridiculous," Barbara sputtered. "This is our house. We're just helping friends." "Actually," I interjected calmly, "you're operating an illegal boarding house. You've accepted payment from the Petersons for the rooms, haven't you?" Barbara's silence was telling. I knew the Petersons had insisted on paying something for the space, and my in-laws would never turn down money. "That's what I thought," I continued. "Unfortunately, this neighborhood isn't zoned for such arrangements, and since you've displaced minor children to accommodate paying tenants." The inspector's eyebrows shot up. Displaced minor children. I led her to the attic, where Emma and Jake's belongings were still piled in boxes. The inspector took more photos, her frown deepening as she documented the makeshift sleeping area. "This is a serious violation," she stated firmly. "The attic isn't approved for residential use, and displacing minors from their legal residence to accommodate paying tenants. I'll need to file a report immediately." Barbara stood frozen, her face cycling through shades of red and white. But we own this house. We can do what we want." "Actually," I said, pulling out another set of papers, "Michael and I have been paying the mortgage for the past 5 years. The house is in our names. You just live here." The truth hit Barbara like a physical blow. She'd always lorded their supposed ownership over us, using it as leverage to control our lives. But she'd never bothered to check the actual paperwork when Michael and I took over the payments years ago. "You can't do this," she whispered, but her voice lacked its usual conviction. "I already have," I replied. "The Petersons will need to find other arrangements immediately. And as for you and George, we'll be having a family meeting tonight about our new living arrangements." As I watched Barbara stumble away to make some frantic phone calls, I felt no satisfaction, only relief. Sometimes standing up for your children means making difficult choices, but I knew in my heart this was the right one. The Victorian house on Maple Street was waiting for us, its keys already in my pocket. Emma and Jake would each have a room twice the size of their old ones, with a shared playroom in between. Most importantly, they would have a home where they were valued, not tolerated. Barbara had no idea that her power play had just cost her everything, but she was about to find out. The family meeting that evening was exactly as tense as I'd expected. George and Barbara sat on one end of the dining room table, their usual confidence shattered. The Petersons had left hours ago, rushing to pack their children's belongings while muttering about being missiled. So, George began, his voice gruff. "You've had this planned all along, haven't you? Waiting to humiliate us." I placed the keys to the Victorian house on the table. "No, I've been planning to protect my children. There's a difference." Michael, sitting beside me, finally found his voice. "Mom, Dad, you've left us no choice. The way you've treated Emma and Jake, it's been getting worse for years." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "We were trying to help our friends. Those children have real talent, real potential. And our children don't?" I cut in, my voice sharp. "Because they prefer reading comics to playing tennis? Because they'd rather build pillow forts than practice piano? That's not what Barbara started, but I wasn't finished. "You moved them to the attic, Barbara. The attic. Like some unwanted furniture you couldn't be bothered to store properly." George shifted uncomfortably. "Now, Amanda, you're being dramatic. It was temporary." "Everything's temporary with you both," Michael interrupted. "Every time you overstep, every time you hurt our children, it's always temporary, or for the best, or you're being too sensitive." He took a deep breath. "Well, you're right about one thing. It is temporary. Because we're moving out." The silence that followed was deafening. Barbara's face went through a range of emotions: shock, anger, fear, before settling on something close to panic. "Moving," she whispered. But this is your home. Where would you go?" I slid a photo of the Victorian house across the table. "Here. Closing is next week. 3 bedrooms, a playroom, and most importantly, no attic." "You can't afford," George started, but stopped when he saw my expression. "My grandmother's inheritance," I explained calmly. "The one you kept telling me was wasteful to save. Turns out it was exactly what we needed." Barbara started to cry, not her usual manipulative tears, but genuine sobs. "This is all because of the rooms. We can fix this. The Petersons will find somewhere else." "This isn't about the rooms," Michael said firmly. "This is about years of dismissing our children, of undermining our parenting, of treating Emma and Jake like they're somehow less worthy than other children. The rooms were just the final straw." I stood up, pulling out one last document. "You have 2 choices. Either you can move out by the end of the month, or you can sign this agreement." "What agreement?" George asked, reaching for the paper. "New house rules. No more unilateral decisions about our children. No more comparing them to others. No more rearranging their lives without our permission. And most importantly, no more treating them like second-class citizens in their own home." Barbara's tears stopped abruptly. "You're giving us ultimatums. In our own." "My house," Michael corrected. "Our house. The one we've been paying for. Your names aren't on any of the paperwork, remember." The realization of just how much power they lost hit them both at once. Years of holding their supposed ownership over our heads, only to discover they had no legal claim at all. "You have until tomorrow to decide," I said, standing up. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to help my children move their belongings back to their rooms." As I headed upstairs, I heard Barbara's muffled voice. "George, do something." But there was nothing they could do. They'd played their hand and lost everything. The next morning, I found the signed agreement on the kitchen counter. Over the following weeks, the change in my in-laws was remarkable. Gone were the snide comments about Emma's comic book collection or Jake's love of building blanket forts. They even started showing genuine interest in their grandchildren's activities. One evening, as I watched Emma showing Barbara her latest art project, a comic book she created herself, I felt a gentle touch on my shoulder. It was Michael. "Thank you," he whispered, "for being strong enough to do what I should have done years ago." I squeezed his hand. Sometimes love means setting boundaries, even with family, maybe especially with family. 6 months later, Emma and Jake are thriving. Their rooms are their own sanctuaries again, filled with the things they love. Barbara and George have learned to be better grandparents, though I keep the signed agreement prominently displayed in my office as a reminder. The Victorian house keys still sit in my desk drawer. We didn't need to move after all. We just needed to stand our ground and demand respect for our children. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even or moving away. Sometimes it's about staying put and forcing others to change instead. Looking back, I'm grateful for that moment when my in-laws pushed too far. It gave us the courage to finally stand up and say enough is enough. And in doing so, we didn't just protect our children's rooms, we protected their right to be exactly who they are. They're just kids, they'll adapt. My father-in-law's voice boomed through our living room as he dropped his son Marcus's gym bags on my children's beds. I stood in the doorway, my hands trembling as I watched him methodically dismantle the room my 8-year-old twins had called their sanctuary since they were born. My name is Olivia Parker, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be watching my father-in-law, Richard Thompson, systematically destroy my children's sense of security while my husband David stood by, nodding in agreement. "Dad's right, honey," David said, placing a hand on my shoulder that felt more restraining than comforting. "The boys are young. They can sleep on the pull-out couch for a few months while Marcus trains for the state championships. This room has the best lighting and space for his equipment." I shrugged off David's hand, my eyes fixed on the soccer trophies and family photos being carelessly tossed into a cardboard box. And where exactly are Tommy and Jack supposed to do their homework? Where will they keep their clothes? Their toys? Richard barely glanced up from his task. The garage has plenty of storage space, and kids these days spend too much time indoors anyway. This will be good for them. The garage. The uninsulated, spider-infested garage where we kept our lawn equipment and old Christmas decorations. That's where my father-in-law thought my children belonged. I watched as Marcus, my 19-year-old brother-in-law, strutted into the room, his college letterman jacket a bold reminder of why this was happening. The star athlete, the pride of the Thompson family, needed a proper setup for his training equipment while he prepared for the upcoming track championships. "This is perfect," Marcus exclaimed, already measuring spaces for his weight bench and treadmill. "The boys won't mind, right, Olivia? They love their Uncle Marcus." Love might be stretching it. The twins had met Marcus exactly 3 times in their lives, during brief holiday visits when he barely acknowledged their existence. But now suddenly he needed to move in with us because the dorm environment isn't conducive to proper athletic training, according to Richard. I watched helplessly as my children's artwork was stripped from the walls, their carefully arranged bookshelf dismantled, their entire world packed away to make room for someone else's dreams. The twins were at school, blissfully unaware that they'd come home to find their room transformed into a personal gym for an uncle they barely knew. "The pull-out couch is actually pretty comfortable," David offered weakly, perhaps sensing my growing anger. "And it's just temporary, until Marcus qualifies for the championships. 3 months, tops." 3 months, 90 nights of my children sleeping in the living room, doing homework on their laps, living out of boxes because their father couldn't stand up to his dad. Because in the Thompson family, athletics always came first, and Richard's golden boy couldn't possibly be expected to train in a regular gym like everyone else. Did anyone even think to ask the twins how they feel about this? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Richard finally turned to face me, his expression a mixture of condescension and impatience. "They're 8, Olivia. At that age, I had David sharing a room with Marcus in a house half this size. Your boys are lucky to have a comfortable couch and a nice living room. Some children don't even have that." The comparison made my blood boil. David had spent years in therapy working through the resentment of always having to sacrifice for his younger brother's athletic pursuits. Now here he was, perpetuating the same cycle with his own children. Besides, Marcus chimed in, "I'll make it up to them. Once I win the championship, they can tell everyone their uncle is a state champion. That's way cooler than having their own room." I bit back the retort that threatened to escape. My children didn't need a state champion uncle. They needed their own space, their own beds, their own sense of security. But looking at the 3 Thompson men, their faces set with that familiar stubborn determination, I knew arguing would be pointless. Instead, I turned and walked to the kitchen, my mind already formulating a plan. If they thought I was going to stand by and watch my children be treated like second-class citizens in their own home, they had severely underestimated me. As I heard them continuing to rearrange the room, discussing where to place Marcus's medals and trophies, I pulled out my phone and made 2 calls. The first was to my sister Emma, a real estate lawyer who had helped us buy this house 5 years ago. The second was to my mother, who had never quite warmed to the Thompson family's particular brand of entitlement. By the time I hung up, I had the beginnings of a solution that would make Richard regret ever suggesting my children belonged in a garage. "The boys will understand," David said later that evening as we prepared dinner. "They know family has to stick together." I stirred the pasta sauce with perhaps more force than necessary. "Yes, they do," I replied quietly. "They absolutely do." That evening, watching my twins try to hold back tears as they discovered their room transformed into a makeshift gym, broke something inside me. Tommy clutched his favorite stuffed dinosaur, the only toy he'd managed to rescue before everything else was relegated to the garage. Jack just stood there, staring at the weight bench where his bed used to be. "But where are we supposed to sleep?" Jack asked, his small voice trembling. Before I could answer, Marcus bounded into the room, already dressed in his training gear. "Check it out, little dudes. Isn't this awesome? Your room is going to help me become a champion." The twins pressed closer to me, shrinking away from their uncle's forced enthusiasm. David appeared behind Marcus, carrying blankets for the pull-out couch. "Come on, boys, it'll be like camping. You love camping, remember?" "We camp in tents," Tommy whispered. "Not our living room." Richard's booming voice carried from the kitchen, where he was instructing his wife, Linda, on how to prepare Marcus's protein shakes. "The boys sound ungrateful, David. When you were their age, you never complained about sacrificing for family." I watched my husband's face fall slightly at the memory, but he quickly masked it. "Dad's right, kids. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for the greater good." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Marcus in my children's room, the twins curled up uncomfortably on the pull-out couch, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open. Emma's email contained everything I needed: property records, mortgage documents, and most importantly, the original agreement David and I had signed when we bought the house. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "The guest rooms are ready whenever you need them, sweetheart. Don't let those Thompsons bully my grandbabies." The next morning brought the first signs that this arrangement was going to be even worse than I'd imagined. Marcus started his training at 5 a.m., the whir of the treadmill and clang of weights jolting my children awake. By 6 a.m., Richard was in the kitchen, loudly preparing Marcus's champion's breakfast, while complaining about the twins' school backpacks cluttering the living room. "They need to learn to keep their things organized," he lectured as Tommy tried to find his homework among the blankets and pillows. "Marcus never leaves his equipment lying around." I bit my tongue, remembering the state of the garage where they'd haphazardly thrown my children's belongings. Linda hovered nearby, occasionally offering weak suggestions about maybe clearing some space in the basement for the boys' things, only to be immediately shut down by Richard. "The basement needs to stay open for Marcus' rainy day training," he insisted. "Can't have anything interfering with his routine." The breaking point came that afternoon. I arrived home from work to find Jack sitting on the front porch, crying quietly. Inside, I could hear Richard berating David. "Your boys need to learn discipline. Marcus can't concentrate with them running around the house making noise. They need to stay outside until he's done training." I found David in the kitchen, looking torn. "Dad has a point, Olivia. The boys were playing tag in the living room. It's disruptive." "They were playing in their home," I said quietly, dangerously. "Where exactly are our children supposed to exist, David? The garage isn't good enough for their belongings. The living room isn't good enough for them to play, and now they can't even be in their own house." "It's temporary," David repeated his new mantra. "Just until the championships." 3 days, I said, my voice steady. "That's how long this has lasted, and our children have already been relegated to second-class citizens in their own home." "Well, I've made some decisions of my own." I pulled out the documents Emma had sent me. "Did you know that when we bought this house, my name was put on the deed first? That legally, I have the right to determine who lives here." David's face paled. "Olivia, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that tomorrow morning, either Marcus and your parents find somewhere else to train, or the twins and I will be staying at my mother's house. And trust me, if we leave, the next paper you'll be seeing won't be property records, it'll be divorce papers." "You can't do this," Richard thundered, having entered the kitchen unnoticed. "This is about family, about supporting Marcus's dreams." I turned to face my father-in-law, years of pent-up frustration finally boiling over. No, Richard, this is about two 8-year-old boys who deserve to feel safe and valued in their own home. This is about not repeating the same toxic patterns that made your own son spend years in therapy. This is about being actual family, not just using that word to manipulate people into giving you what you want. The kitchen fell silent. David stared at the property documents, his face a mix of shock and something else. Was it recognition? Richard's face had turned an alarming shade of red. Sleep on it, I said, gathering my things. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Either way, my children will not spend another night on that couch. I walked out of the kitchen, heading to the living room where Tommy and Jack were quietly playing with their few remaining toys. Come on, boys, I said, managing a smile. How about we get ice cream for dinner tonight? As we drove to the ice cream parlor, I caught glimpses of my sons in the rearview mirror. They looked tired, confused, but there was also relief in their eyes. Relief that someone was finally standing up for them. My phone buzzed again. Emma confirming she'd filed the necessary paperwork, just in case. Everything was in place. Now it was up to David to decide. Would he stand with his children, or continue enabling his father's favoritism? Either way, by this time tomorrow, things would change. I just hoped David would make the right choice before it was too late. The next morning, I woke early to find David sitting at the kitchen table, still in yesterday's clothes. His eyes were red, and several cups of coffee littered the surface in front of him. He looked up as I entered. I spent all night thinking about what you said, he began quietly. About therapy, about toxic patterns. I kept remembering how it felt, always having to give up everything for Marcus. Always being told that family meant sacrifice. But somehow I was the only one sacrificing. I poured myself a coffee and sat across from him. From upstairs came the familiar sound of Marcus's early morning workout. I called Uncle Steve last night, David continued. You know, Dad's brother. He told me something interesting. Apparently, he has a fully equipped home gym in his basement. He lives 15 minutes from the training center where Marcus practices. That's convenient, I said carefully, watching my husband's face. He offered to let Marcus stay with him months ago, but Dad insisted on coming here instead. Said it was about family bonding. David's laugh was bitter, more like about control. The sound of small feet padding down the stairs interrupted us. Tommy and Jack appeared, already dressed for school, their faces showing the strain of another uncomfortable night on the couch. David looked at our sons, really looked at them, perhaps for the first time since this nightmare began. I'm so sorry, boys, he said, his voice cracking. I forgot my most important job is being your dad. Before the twins could respond, Richard's heavy footsteps descended the stairs. Marcus needs his protein shake mix exactly right, he announced, then stopped short seeing us all at the table. David stood up. Dad, we need to talk. Marcus isn't staying here anymore. What followed was exactly the explosion I'd expected. Richard raged about family loyalty, about opportunities, about ungrateful children. Linda hovered anxiously in the background while Marcus stood on the stairs, looking surprisingly unsurprised. Actually, Marcus cut through his father's tirade. I'd already called Uncle Steve. He's coming to pick me up in an hour. The silence that followed was deafening. You what? Richard sputtered. His gym is better anyway, Marcus shrugged. And honestly, Dad, making my nephew sleep on a couch wasn't cool. Even I can see that. Within 2 hours, the house was restored to normal. Marcus and his equipment were gone, headed to Uncle Steve's. Richard and Linda left in stunning silence. Richard's parting shot about remembering who really cares about family falling flat in the face of David's quiet resolve. That afternoon, I helped the twins put their room back together. Every poster rehung, every toy rescued from the garage, every book back on its shelf. David worked alongside us, taking special care to position everything exactly as the boys wanted it. Is Uncle Marcus mad at us? Tommy asked as we made his bed with his favorite superhero sheets. No, buddy, David answered, pulling our son into a hug. Sometimes grown-ups forget what's really important. But I promise you, no one is ever taking your room away again. That evening, as the twins slept soundly in their own beds for the first time in days, David and I sat on the back porch. I called my therapist today, he said quietly. Made an appointment for next week. I don't want to carry Dad's legacy forward anymore. I squeezed his hand. You're already breaking the cycle just by choosing our children first. You know Dad won't forgive this easily, he warned. Maybe not, I agreed. But our job isn't to make your father happy. It's to make sure our children never have to doubt their place in this family. David nodded, and we sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with dramatic gestures, but with quiet choices to protect those who depend on us. In standing up to Richard, we'd done more than reclaim our room, we'd reclaimed our family's future. And if Richard couldn't accept that, well, that would be his loss entirely.